So, hi, today we're diving into a podcast SEO audit for Olivia Radcliffe. By the end of this episode, hopefully, we'll have identified one or two key areas that Olivia can focus on to help to reach her goals over the next 6 months. So, welcome, Olivia. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So, before we start, if we were to meet in 6 months' time and you were telling me about the amazing things happening in your business, how would your podcast be helping with that?
It's a complicated question. And I don't think it's just me that would find that complicated. It's hard to think of your goals and where you want to be with things sometimes. So, a little bit of backstory on the podcast. It was just me and a co-host for the first couple years of having it. And recently she had to kind of step back because of some family issues. And then I took over the podcast full time. And during our time together doing the podcast, we had it as a really fun hobby. Essentially, we just loved doing it. We wanted an excuse to do something together, but we didn't really optimize it too much or pay too much attention to it. So I've had the podcast for a few years now. It's been growing, it has a listenership, but now that it's solely mine, I've been trying to refocus it and make sure that it is something that actually speaks directly towards my business, and that as much as I love it and as fun as it is, it's not just a hobby because it takes a lot of time and energy. And as a busy mom, I do not have a ton of time and energy. Long way to get to the answer is in 6 months, I would love for the podcast to be providing direct value to my existing audience and
Mhm.
helping new people enter my world and get on my list so I can nurture them further from there. I think the nurturing part for both new people and existing clients is pretty big for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I love podcasts for that. I think it's so important. And it's such a simple way to help people to move along that journey to understanding you, to trusting you, to yeah, really getting to know why you're the authority on what you do, I think really. So that sounds good. So before we start, tell us a little bit about your business and how your podcast currently kind of sits within your other marketing activities.
Yeah, so my business is the Bluebell Group. And on one side of the business, I run a marketing agency. But my main passion and the core of the business is I work with moms with businesses and really help them grow a business and life they love.
Mhm.
Even if they only have nap time to work in or one episode of Bluey or whatever it is, I still want to help them find that success they're looking for. Now, the podcast I mentioned before was something I had with my business friend, and then we ended up being business partners and we started a separate business together. And the podcast has always been marketing like a mother, and it's always talked towards directed towards moms and helping them grow their business and marketing in very family friendly ways that prioritize the rest of their lives as well.
Mhm.
So that subject has always kind of stuck the same. But again, we weren't very purposeful with it
Mhm.
originally. So it
Mhm.
was just kind of this fun piece that if people happened upon it and then came into our worlds separately or together from there, it was great. Now I am using the podcast a lot more intentionally, I'm going to say. And I use it very much as a way to provide value.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying very hard to kind of index the episodes and figure out where I talk about what so that
Mhm.
I actually can use the episodes as a tool to help answer questions and provide value to existing clients. And then I'm starting to promote the podcast more to new people, trying to get new people into the world that way.
That sounds really good. You mentioned about creating a database and creating a sort of somewhere where you can understand your different episodes and understand what you've talked about. I think that's a really good point because I have that issue with myself, actually working out, okay, when have I talked about something? And I'm using a Google Doc for mine, and I find that's helping me. Have you got a particular thing that you're doing to help with that, or because obviously you've got a lot more episodes than I have you got a sort of a way that you can think about the topics that you talk about and when you've talked about those before so you can link your content together?
Yeah, I have about a couple hundred episodes at this point. And while I can remember who I've talked to and kind of what we talked about, I do not remember if it was
last week, 2 years ago, whatever. I couldn't tell you the episode number or title in order to actually share it productively with anyone. So what I did do is I started, like you said, with a Google Doc, and I've started just indexing everything with the episode number, the title of it, the guest, and then I'm in the process of adding in the show notes and maybe a transcript as well. And so the ultimate goal, I've kind of built out a GPT for myself where I'm uploading the transcripts and all of this information, and it's kind of creating behind the scenes this big Rolodex database of my episodes, and it can be very high level of here's the title and person, or it can get granular and really get into the transcripts and pull out specific key phrases and words and such and search that way. So it's been a process that it's taken a minute, but
it certainly does, doesn't it? But that's a really good idea to do it that way. I think one of the big benefits of doing that from an SEO point of view is the fact that you can then link your content together. So if you know you've already talked about a related topic, or talked about this topic in a different way, or talked about it, you've gone into it like as a high level view and you want to dive into that deeper, then linking those episodes together, whether you do that in your podcast player app and you actually link them in the show notes, I think that's a really good idea to do that, because then hopefully it encourages people then to binge your content and to then find other episodes that are also are useful for them. But I'm going to start sharing my screen actually. So I'm going to share screen. And this one.
Suddenly very nervous. What are you going to see?
Well, a lot of people say that with these audits. If I invite people on, they're like, oh, I'm not sure I want you to examine my stuff. But actually, all I want to do is find some potential quick wins. And I love it with podcast SEO because there is so much potential for quick wins. Whereas with Google, we have to wait for Google to recrawl our website and understand what we've done. And there are things we can do to speed that up. But with a podcast SEO, we can go in, we can make changes in our podcast player apps, and those changes can happen and straight away, so we can make changes and it literally has an effect straight away. So when I'm looking at podcasts, there are kind of two areas that we can focus on with podcast SEO. So there's the podcast SEO within our podcast player apps, and then there's the podcast SEO that links back to our website as well. And a lot of podcast SEO does link to our own website, really. And this is something that you don't have your podcast episodes on your own domain at the moment, do you?
We switched hosts a lot of different times during the lifetime of the podcast. And because we had two separate businesses and then our joint business, we never put it on our specific websites. We linked it as in like, here, go listen to it. But we didn't have anything on our direct websites related to show notes or episodes or anything.
Yeah. I mean, there are ways that you can build that link up between them, but having those episodes on your own website and having that content specifically there on your website can be really helpful to build up the authority of your own domain. And I'm all about building up our own domain authority and building up content that we own first. This is one of the things I love about podcasts, is that we do own them. So you can do that. If you decide you want to change hosts, then you can get those episodes and you can move them somewhere else, which you can't do with social media content. You can't do that, with YouTube, unfortunately. That content exists and you own it. But actually having those URLs on your own website could be helpful. But it depends. It entirely depends on what your strategy is. I would maybe think about starting that with the most important episodes, actually getting some URLs. So this is your website, getting some URLs on there that relate to the podcast. Have you actually got a URL here that ends in Marketing Like a Mother podcast?
I do not. We were using a separate marketinglikeamother.com URL specifically for the podcast.
Okay.
So, and I have not reconnected that to anything since we made the move to Substack.
Do you still own that domain?
I do. Yes, I do.
Good. Keep hold of that.
It's on my list to do something with at some point. So,
do you know what? All I would do with it is literally just create some kind of basic podcast page for your own website. And then just redirect the whole URL from the marketinglikeamother.com URL, just redirect that to that page on your website. And that will help Google to understand. And do you have Google Search Console set up for the old domain for Marketing Like a Mother podcast?
Not for Marketing Like a Mother, I don't think.
No.
I don't think we ever went through that process for that one.
You could potentially do that. And I mean, it depends how long has that URL been like not live, not had anything content on there?
At least 6 months,
Yeah.
probably
So
more than that.
I mean, it would be worth knowing how much traffic you had going there. 6 months is probably a little bit long, but what you could potentially do, say if you'd done that last week and you had traffic that was going there, you could then tell Google that you were moving, that domain was moving to this domain. And it might be worth it for the sake of it. It doesn't take a lot to do that.
Yeah.
You could do that in Google Search Console. It's a little bit more sort of technical doing that, but it's certainly something to consider. If you're letting go of an old domain name, then when it's that kind of thing where it's very specific to the name of the show, I wouldn't let that go, but I would just redirect that to your website, because then it just all helps. It helps Google to understand that the Bluebell group is linked to Marketing Like a Mother podcast. So yeah, I would definitely do that.
Helpful.
And then what you could do is your most important episodes, so the ones that are most key to your like core topics, the pillar things that you talk about, create some URLs on your own website around that. So I have that where I do that with my podcast, and I create individual URLs for each episode. And I do them as kind of like blog casts, really. So writing blogs is not my biggest strength. I'm much better getting on a live, recording me talking about something, and then that's a much better way of me communicating. But what I've started doing now, for each episode, I create it's like a blog, but it's essentially just a URL on my website where that episode exists. And I put in there, I normally just slightly tweak the show notes from that particular episode and put the transcript in there. I normally put in there key takeaways, the most notable quote from that episode, other quotes from the episode. You can build it out with some content from that particular episode. I normally have at least one place on that page where it links back to Buzzsprout, which is where my podcast is hosted. And so you're just creating those links between your website and your podcast website that builds up that authority on your own domain. And you can just build that content out a little bit more. So you've got this simple page. And you said about getting confused with your own content, really, and whether other people could be confused with your show art and things like that. You could make this a lot more of an easier place for people to come in and find the type of podcast episodes that they want to listen to. And as I say, start with those most important topics first, and make sure that your sort of cornerstone pieces of content, the bits that are most important for people to understand, and also for Google to understand that you are an authority on these particular topics. Get those ones on here first, and then people can come in and have a little look on your own website. They can come in and have a little look at your podcast page. And that's probably one of the things that doesn't necessarily need to take a lot of time and effort to do that, but that could be really helpful. That's kind of come back to more of your website SEO, but it all links together, definitely.
Yeah. I'm thinking through whether it needs to be I create a separate page, or if I should re-engage my actual blog for the website and start putting them as kind of entries to the blog, because currently my blog is not live.
So I have both, actually. I have a podcast page and I have a blog page on my website. And I have both linked from my navigation menu. And the ones that I have developed into more of full blog posts, I have those on the blog page. I'm preferring creating those podcast episodes, really. So I think it definitely helps people depending on which way they like to digest content, and you don't want those pages competing against each other. So because you are creating so much new content and the podcasts coming out regularly, I would be more inclined to develop that podcast page. And then if any of those episodes are ones where you think actually this really does need to be a written blog, then create blogs around it, and then you could create links to those pages, and you could even then mark one of those pages as canonical for that particular keyword that you're trying to rank that page for. So then you're telling Google, actually, if somebody's searching for this particular keyword, this is the page you need to show. So I would be inclined to do that, really. But if you've got those podcast episodes there, if that content is there and ready to go, you've already got the descriptions, you've already got the transcripts, I'd be more inclined to do that first, really.
Okay.
And even just having, even if you focused on your most popular episodes and got those on there, it's just all building that content on your own website, really.
Yeah, I like that, prioritizing your domain.
That's I'm all about that. I've created quite a few episodes around why it's so important to create content that we own first, and rather than just keep feeding the algorithm with stuff that doesn't then raise our authority, doesn't raise our credibility. And this is becoming even more important with AI searches, is that we need to be that authority on the topics that we talk about, really. So if we were looking at the podcast specifically, so if we were looking at specific things that you can do within your podcast descriptions and the show notes and everything, one of the things I would say, let me come into, so I listen to podcasts in Pocket Casts, so that's why I've got that here. There's a few key places that we can make changes within our podcast player apps. I use Buzzsprout to host my podcast. So I would go into Buzzsprout and make some changes to my show description, my name, and that's where you can kind of make those changes and they show up straight away. One of the most important places where we can actually try and get those keywords and try and connect with people who are searching for what we talk about on our podcast is in the show name. And it's not something that you would want to change the show name, but what you could do is add on a name extension. So my podcast name, I call it the Website Success Show. If I'm talking about it, it will be the Website Success Show. But the actual name is currently, because I do change it every now and again just to see if that makes a difference to what's showing up in searches. But mine is actually the Website Success Show, SEO and website tips for local and online businesses who want more website traffic and sales. So I had to scroll to see it was, and I couldn't remember that. I wouldn't be able to just like reel that off the top of my head. But having that in there, you would still call the show Marketing Like a Mother, but adding that something in there that
subtitle
can really help. Yeah, it can make a massive difference. The show name and the show description is one of the sort of key places where you can optimize your podcast really to show up in searches. And when we're talking about podcast searches, we're talking about people looking in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, wherever they're looking, trying to find shows like yours or trying to find answers to a particular problem or a solution, or trying to connect with content like yours really. So that's something you could think about, adding something in there just to increase that visibility with the show name. It's definitely something where all of these things I would be using ChatGPT or Google Gemini to help me. I actually did a little ChatGPT thing before we came on. So looking at your show description, so I put into ChatGPT a little prompt of how could we improve the podcast show description for the Marketing Like a Mother podcast? And then I pasted the description you've got in there already, the show name and description in there. And then I put in there, so this is something I like to add on to the descriptions, is I put maybe if you're asking questions like ... So telling ChatGPT that that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for it. And it said, and here's a refined version of the podcast description that keeps it engaging, relatable and clear, whilst highlighting the podcast's unique value for mum entrepreneurs. And then it's come up with the start of it is kind of the same. A podcast for mum entrepreneurs who want to grow a thriving business whilst navigating the beautiful chaos of motherhood. Whether you're squeezing in work during a nap time or stealing a few moments of focus while Bluey entertains, this show is here to help you build a business and life you love without sacrificing your sanity. Each episode features step-by-step strategies, actionable tips, and inspiring guest interviews to help you market smarter, not harder. If you're asking questions like, how do I attract clients without working 24/7? What's the best way to grow my business with limited time? Can I really balance it all without burning out? You're in the right place. Hit play and let's make your dreams doable.
Love it. There we go. That's perfect.
I'll share that with you afterwards. But it's those kind of things that actually, I often do this. If I'm working with somebody on their Google business profile, we'll go in and do this for the description there. And it always comes up with something amazing. So I think we're very fortunate that we've got these tools to help us. But you can see how just adding that in, and those questions might not necessarily be the ones that would connect with people with your show, but it's worth thinking about that. You could even go in and then ask ChatGPT, okay, no, the questions aren't quite right. Think about these sort of ones really. But having that in your main show description is really, really helpful. Just expanding on that description a little bit. One thing I did see when I look at mine, if I search for my own one here, is that it looks okay on here. I think it was one of them. I maybe went onto it on Spotify or something like that, and it was all squashed up together. So it might not look beautiful, but it's worth doing because those terms will show up in the searches, and also that will show up in searches on Google as well. So if you've got some questions in there that relate to what the problems that you're solving and what you're talking about, that can then show up if somebody is searching for that kind of term on Google really. And then you can think about the same things with your individual episodes as well. So the episode titles and descriptions as well is something that you can also think about, the questions that you've asked or answered within that episode, adding that into the show notes, or whether you call them show notes or episode descriptions. I know in Buzzsprout it describes it as episode descriptions, but you can add those in there as well. And then show art is something as well where that's probably the key areas is your show name, description, and the show art. are the ones that are quite simple to change and can make quite a big difference. So I love the fact that, so if we're thinking about show art, we're thinking about people looking at a tiny thumbnail on their phone, which is usually where people will be discovering podcasts. It's the kind of thing that if people are in their podcast player apps, Apple and whichever, as I say, I keep saying Apple, but whichever podcast player platform they're using, it will be suggesting other podcasts that they may find entertaining or helpful. And if your show art is very visible in terms of the words on there, that's the bit that's going to stand out to people. So I think sometimes people can have a show art where it's a big picture of their face and then the words are really hard to see. And we're definitely, if you can switch that around. And yours, I love the fact that mother stands out so much, but whether you could then make marketing a bit bigger there. And then if you did have that extension into the show name, having that in there as well. So let's have a look at mine again.
So do have that
subtitle in there.
Yeah, I would. If you can, I mean, or have something like that. Actually, I'm looking at mine and actually, yeah, there's no way I could have had that whole subtitle in there, but just something in that. I changed this recently, actually. So I changed it recently and put my face on there. I didn't have that on there for a while, but yeah, just having, mine used to be the website success show was bigger and then the website and SEO tips was smaller. So I thought, well, I'll change it around. And I've had a few people have told me they found me from typing website and SEO tips into the podcast player app. So it's worth having a little tweak around with it. But obviously it depends on whether that then is just a killer having to redo the branding. I only use these. I don't have individual episode show art. So it makes it easier that I just change that once and it changes it across everything. But yeah, it's certainly worth having a try with that, seeing if you can just get some more visibility from doing that, really. And definitely look at it on your phone, because I think it makes it even more sort of evident when you look at it on your phone of whether you can actually see it or not. Especially if it's people who need to get their glasses out to look at their phone as well. Ideally,
yes.
Same with websites as well. When people use fonts that are too small, don't make people get their glasses out to do business with you, really. So any questions about what we've sort of covered so far, or anything that's made like light bulb moments, or anything that's kind of made you think,
oh, that all makes so much sense. I really love having the questions in the show description, because that's such a no-brainer for SEO, but also really helps people self-identify of, yes, I've absolutely been asking these questions lately. And I think that's brilliant. So
yeah, definitely. And if you then create that podcast page on your website, you could have those questions on that page as well. So that could be really helpful. Brilliant. So yeah, I think so. The main things are tying it back to your own domain, even just getting the URL and having that link of marketing like a mother on your own domain, I think could be really helpful. And then just adding in those the show name description and the art. Have a think about the artwork as well, really. So I think you've got some specific things that can be helpful to do, and definitely carry on with that database for the podcast episodes as well.
So one random question.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned that the podcast went through several iterations. It went through several different brand changes, and we changed colors and all this stuff. For the title, and I do have different episode cover art now, where I'm putting in the number of the episode and the name of the guest. How important is it that I go back and kind of make things look the same, feel the same? Like, you notice I have some of them, I just started numbering the episodes because I was really losing track of where I was with things. How important do you think it is for me to go back and start to kind of make things a little more cohesive, or at least make sure the branding is the same? If you mentioned the cover art, things coming up.
I think it's getting that balance, really. I love the idea of adding the numbers. I didn't notice that you didn't have numbers before that. It makes such a difference in terms of you being able to say, like I usually when I'm recording my podcast, I'll name at least 2 other episodes that people can go and listen to, and having the numbers there is just so much easier. And if you're ever doing guest talks or anything like that, you can literally tell people episode 1, 3, 4 or whatever. Then that, I think, is important. So what I would potentially do with that is if you examine your old content and think about the episodes that are most important in relation to those core topics that you talk about. Start with those ones first. So even if you know, okay, episode 50 is one that I really need to, I've not talked about that elsewhere, or it's something that's so important that you need to keep linking back to that episode. Or if it's an episode that's been really popular as well, that could be the places to start. Going in and just adding that number in there and updating that show, so that is all on brand. You could potentially do that. I'm not so sure with the show art. I think it does show an evolution of the podcast sometimes, so I wouldn't be too worried about that, because the majority of people are going to see the latest show art anyway in the podcast player apps. That's what you tend to see, is whatever's the latest one. So I wouldn't worry so much about that. But in terms of going back and updating other stuff, it really all depends on that episode, on how relevant it is to what you still talk about, and what is relevant in terms of bringing people through that customer journey to buying with you. And yeah, what episodes are, so I've just completely lost my train of thought there, but yeah, what episodes are the ones that you really do need to sort of focus on first, really. I would think about it that way.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So before we finish, I would love you to give yourself another little shout out and let everyone know specifically, again, what you do, and most importantly, where they can connect with you and find out more.
Well, you should listen to my podcast, Marketing Like a Mother. No, in all seriousness, you should. But I love helping moms find their freedom and growing a business that actually suits their life and enhances their life, not something that you feel like you have to fit in a life around doing your business, where you feel like you're constantly changing your desk and overwhelmed and stressed and just spinning your wheels trying to catch up every single day. So let's flip that on its head. Let's do that the other way around. So that's really what I dig into in the podcast. I have a lot of good resources for that, free resources on my website, thebluebellgroup.com, or hit me up on social media. I'm mainly going to be on Instagram at the Bluebell Group. And yeah, if you have any questions or want to go learn more deeper about that sort of topic, feel free, shoot me a message and I'll get back with you.
I love that. I'll put those links in the show notes as well for this episode. So if this episode has made you think about your podcast SEO and you'd like to explore optimizing it a bit more, then you can also visit my website and you can get a free SEO for podcasts checklist. I also offer a mini intensive, which is a short session where we can actually get your podcast SEO optimized together. So thank you so much for listening. And thanks, Olivia, for being here. And I'll see you soon. Bye.